The crystal chandeliers above shimmered with a golden glow, casting soft reflections on the marble floors of the Grand Sapphire Hotel. Everything about the engagement venue screamed wealth. Elegant floral arrangements, a live quartet, champagne towers, and guests dressed in designer labels. It was, without a doubt, the kind of engagement party that trended on social media before it even ended. And in the center of it all stood my daughter, Arushi. She looked breathtaking in her lavender lehenga, her smile bright enough to rival the chandeliers above. It was her big day, her engagement to Rohan Malhotra, the son of one of India's richest industrialists. And as her father, I should have been the proudest man in the room. But I wasn't. Not because I wasn't proud. I was immensely. But because something about Rohan never sat right with me. I stood at the far end of the hall, wearing a simple gray blazer over my old white shirt. It wasn't branded. It didn't have an Italian designer's name stitched inside. But it was clean and pressed with care. I watched quietly, avoiding attention, as the social elite swirled around my daughter like she was a new jewel in their collection. Rohan was all smiles in front of the cameras, holding Arushi's hand, waving to guests. But when the cameras turned away, his expressions often changed. Cold, calculated, impatient. He hadn't even bothered to speak to me properly. And soon, that would become much worse. The dinner began. Guests clinked glasses, toasts were raised, and speeches followed. The MC called Rohan and Arushi to the stage for a short thank you. Rohan took the mic with the smug confidence of someone who'd never been told. "No. I just want to say," he began, flashing his white teeth, "that I'm thankful to be joining a humble family." There was an awkward pause. Some guests chuckled politely. "I mean, you all know my father? Rajendra Malhotra." Rohan continued, "Hoed our business legacy. But it's good to balance all that with simpler roots." He looked directly at me. "You know, when I first met Arushi's father, I thought he was the driver. Lofter. Real this time. Not polite." Some clapped. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I said nothing. Arushi froze next to him, her smile cracking ever so slightly. He's a quiet man. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't wear fancy clothes. "But hey," Rohan said, shrugging, "not everyone can be somebody, right?" This time the laughter was louder. Some people looked uncomfortable. Arushi stared at him in shock. Rohan added, "No offense, uncle. I respect everyone, even nobodies." The silence that followed was heavier than all the diamonds in the room. I stood there, still, calm. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My daughter ran up to me seconds later, her eyes full of tears. "Papa, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's okay," I said gently, patting her hand. He's not the first one to call me that. I was about to leave quietly, not wanting to create a scene at my daughter's event, when a ripple passed through the crowd. Someone important had arrived. A tall man in a navy sherwani, flanked by security, walked in. Rajendra Malhotra, the business tycoon. Rohan's father. He moved with purpose, scanning the crowd for his son. Then his eyes landed on me. He stopped dead in his tracks. "Rajiv," he whispered loud enough for several around him to hear. I gave a polite nod, unsure how much he remembered. He walked closer. "It's really you." Rohan, still on stage, called out, "Dead! Over here?" But Mr. Malhotra didn't move. He walked up to me instead, and to everyone's shock, he extended his hand with visible respect. Then, quietly, he bowed his head. "You are my mentor," he said loud enough now. "The man who taught me everything I know. The real visionary behind the growth of our family empire until you disappeared." A gasps around us. People turned. Conversations stopped. Even the quartet's violinist missed a note. Rohan's smirk vanished. "I owe everything I have to you, sir," Malhotra continued. "And to hear that my son disrespected you like this, I am ashamed." I glanced at Arushi, who stood frozen beside me. "Wait," Rohan finally stammered, jumping off stage. "This man, he's Rajiv Mira." The name echoed in the hall like a whisper growing into a storm. Rajiv Mira. Once a household name. A legendary entrepreneur in the early 2000s, known for building and selling one of the biggest tech companies in India. Then, suddenly, gone from the public eye. No interviews. No social media. Vanished. Rumors said he was betrayed by his partners. That he took the fall for something he didn't do. I never corrected those rumors, because I chose peace over revenge, until tonight. Rohan stood in front of me now, visibly shaken. The arrogance in his posture had vanished. I didn't know, he said quietly. I'm sorry, sir. Don't call me sir, I said, my voice firm but even. I'm just a nobody, remember. His face turned pale. I looked at Arushi. Her eyes were full of conflict, pain, pride, confusion. I wait outside. I told her softly, you decide what happens next. And with that, I walked away, leaving a stunned silence behind me. But that was just the beginning. Because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of a storm gathering strength. The ride home from the engagement was silent. Arushi sat beside me in the back seat. Still dressed in her now, wrinkled lehenga, staring blankly out the window. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her dupatta. She hadn't said a word since I walked out of the venue. I didn't ask her to. Some silences are sacred. Some are just necessary. But her silence wasn't just shock. It was heartbreak, betrayal, and confusion fighting to rise all at once. You should have told me, she finally whispered. Her voice was small, hurt, and tired. Told you what? I asked gently. Who you are. I gave her a half smile. I'm your father? That's all that mattered. She turned to me then. But you're Rajiv Mira, the Rajiv Mira, the man from all those articles. You built that tech empire. You were? She stopped herself. And you let them treat you like that. I didn't let them, I said. I just didn't need to stop them. The 20 years ago, I wasn't always this quiet man in an old car. 2 decades ago, I was the founder and CEO of Mera Technologies, a name that once dominated headlines. We developed early artificial intelligence platforms for logistics and healthcare, long before others caught on. It was my life's work. But back then, power came with predators. I trusted the wrong partners. They manipulated board votes, twisted audits, and sold our company to a foreign investor without my knowledge. I was publicly blamed for a false accounting scandal, one I never committed. My name was cleared years later in legal silence, but by then, the damage was done. Headlines had already crucified me. Instead of chasing vindication, I left it all. My wife had just passed in a car crash. Arushi was only 10. I packed up, sold what was left of my assets, and moved into a quieter life to raise her. I told her I was a simple IT consultant. That's what she believed. That's what the world believed. Until last night, the morning after the engagement, my phone rang. Unknown number. I ignored it. Rang again. And again. By the 5th call, I picked up. Sir? Came a familiar voice. Nervous? Formal? Is Rajendra Malhotra? I didn't speak. Please, he said. I'd like to meet. Today. If possible. Somewhere private. We met in a quiet cafe in the older part of town, away from paparazzi and boardrooms. Rajendra looked different from the man on magazine covers. Less steel. More guilt. You disappeared after everything? He said quietly. I thought you'd left the country. I did, I replied. In a way. He nodded slowly. You were the best I'd ever worked under. When I started, I was just another sales guy. You mentored me, trusted me, and yet, I said, looking directly at him, you never spoke up when they destroyed my name. His face darkened. I tried, but I was powerless then. I was just climbing. I didn't have control. You have it now, I said. He took a long breath. Rohan didn't know. I never told him about you. I didn't think we'd cross paths like this. You raised him, I said, and yet he carries the arrogance of someone who thinks respect is earned through money. I know, he said softly, and I failed him in that. There was a long silence. Then he added, I came to ask for your forgiveness. I looked down at my tea. Steam rose and faded. I didn't come back for revenge, I said. I only came to support my daughter. But your son called me a nobody at her engagement. I'm ashamed of him. As you should be. That evening I sat with Arushi in our garden. She brought out an old album. Photos of her childhood, her school awards, the small birthdays I managed to make special without money or fame. I don't know if I can marry him, she said. It's not just what he said to you. It's how he looks at people. How he looks at me sometimes. You're allowed to change your mind? I said. But will it look like we're backing out because of wealth? She asked, troubled. I looked at her directly. Arushi, no relationship built on pride, humiliation, or arrogance can survive. You don't owe him your loyalty if it costs your peace. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. Do you know? She said quietly, after the party. He didn't even apologize. He just said, why didn't you tell me your dad was rich? Not that he was wrong, but that he missed a detail. I said nothing. Her eyes filled with resolve. That's not a mistake, she said. That's character. Meanwhile, at the Malhotra estate, Rowan slammed the glass down on the bar counter. He made me look like a fool, he snapped. In front of everyone? You made yourself look like a fool? Rajendra said coldly. You insulted a man you knew nothing about. He was dressed like a watchman, Rohan shouted. What was I supposed to think? Think. Rajendra stepped closer. You're about to take over my business. And you can't recognize class when it's quiet. That man built empires before you were born. He walked away from it all for his daughter. That's power. Rohan scoffed, still defensive. Well, maybe he should have stayed gone. Rajendra's face turned to steel. Say that again. Rohan looked up, startled. Say that again? Rajendra repeated, his voice low. And I swear, I'll hand the company to someone who does know the value of respect. That night, I received a message. From Rohan Malhotra. Sir, I'd like to meet. One chance, please. I didn't reply. Because Rohan wasn't ready for forgiveness. He wasn't ready for truth. But I was. And this time, I wasn't going to walk away. Not for revenge. But for something better. The headlines had quieted. The engagement party had faded from the gossip columns. But the echo of what happened that night still rang loud in the minds of those who mattered. Especially in the towering office of Malhotra Global Corp. But I didn't waste time reading tabloids. I was busy building. Back to work, I hadn't set foot in a boardroom in nearly 2 decades. But the moment I entered that old office, I still held under a trust. Just a forgotten floor in a run-down building. I felt something inside me click back into place. Not ego, not vengeance. Purpose. I started with a single call. Shivan, I said. It's Rajiv. The voice on the other end cracked with emotion. Sir? Rajiv, sir? I thought you'd never? I'm back, I said. Quietly for now. I'm starting something. Are you in? He didn't hesitate. Where do I report? Shivam had been my most brilliant analyst 20 years ago. Now he was running logistics for an international company. He wasn't the only one I called. In the next few days, I had a team, small, loyal, and brilliant. People who had once worked beside me, who remembered what integrity looked like in a cutthroat world. We called it Arav Enterprises, named after Arushi's late mother, Aravia. Nobody knew who was behind it, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Malhotra Global begins to feel the shift. It started slow. A key logistics contract, long held by the Malhotras, was suddenly outbid by a newcomer. Then a hospital tech initiative lost its tender to a new competitor, Arav Enterprises. Who the hell is behind this company? Rohan shouted during a board meeting, slamming his fist on the table. They're ghosts. No public face. No records. They're not ghosts, Rajendra Malhotra said quietly. They're shadows. And some shadows have teeth. Rohan scoffed. You think it's him, don't you? That old man. No way. He doesn't have the money. Rajendra looked at his son. He doesn't need money. He has loyalty, brains, and time. You gave him motive. Arushi makes her decision. Meanwhile, Arushi had started asking questions, not just about Rohan, but about herself. She watched as her fiancé tried to win her back with designer gifts and high-end dinners, but never a real apology. never remorse. She watched how he handled waiters, drivers, assistants, her friends, and slowly she began to see it all clearly. One evening, as I was returning from a long meeting, she sat waiting for me in the living room, her engagement ring placed on the table between us. "I told him it's over," she said simply. I didn't ask for details. I just nodded proud, but she continued. "He didn't even ask why. Just said, 'You'll regret this. You're giving up a life most women dream of.'" I gave her a soft smile. "You're not most women, and you come from a legacy stronger than his empire." "I do," she said. "Even if no one sees it, they will," I said. "One day, they'll know exactly who you are." The power play begins in the next 6 months. Arav Enterprises expanded like wildfire. We didn't just steal clients, we earned them. Through better innovation, more ethical practices, and faster delivery, our tech division launched platforms that outperformed Malhotra's aging systems. Rohan's frustration turned into paranoia. At one point, he tried to buy out our subcontractors, only to discover they were former employees of Mira Technologies. Men and women who had once vowed never to trust a big company again. Until I called. I didn't need revenge. I was rebuilding something pure. But then came the final blow. A proposal with a signature. One of the largest medical chains in the country was putting out a multi-billion rupee tender. Malhotra Global was the expected winner, until Arav Enterprises submitted a proposal that stunned everyone. Faster deployment, transparent pricing, revolutionary AI diagnostics, and one last-page founder and chief consultant Rajiv Mira. For the first time, I signed my name publicly. The media exploded. Ars AJV Matrabiri Ks Silen CE after 20 years, Anodiao Motiachi Nomika Uf a Ligi END. The day the news broke, I received an invitation. Face-to-face with Rohan, the meeting was set at a private club in Delhi. I walked in wearing the same gray blazer from the engagement night. Rohan stood when I entered, trying to appear composed. But his jaw tightened. "You've made your point," he said. "I haven't made a point," I said. "I built a business." "You took everything from me!" "No," I corrected. "You lost everything the moment you believed wealth meant superiority." He sat down defeated. "I was going to marry your daughter," he said. "No," I replied. "You were going to own her. There's a difference." He didn't respond. So I stood. "This isn't about you, Rohan. It never was. You just gave me the excuse to rise again, and I'm glad you did." He looked up at me. "You're going to destroy us?" "No," I said. "You'll do that to yourself. I just reminded you that even nobodies can build kingdoms." At home that night, Arushi joined me on the balcony. We looked out at the city skyline, quiet and peaceful. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Everyone knows who you are again." I nodded. "But you always did." She smiled. "I think you did all this for me." "No," I said. "I did it for us. For our name. For the idea that no matter how hard they try to bury you, you rise. With grace. With power. With silence." She looked up at me. "You're not a nobody?" "Papa," I smiled. "I never was." The morning of the wedding came, but there were no drums, no flowers, no guests. Instead of exchanging vows at the lavish venue booked months in advance, Arushi stood in our home's small kitchen, making tea. It was supposed to be her wedding day. Instead, it became a day of rebirth. She had returned the ring weeks ago. And though society whispered, though so-called friends questioned her decision, Arushi stood firm. She had chosen peace over pretense. As she handed me a cup of tea, she smiled. "You know," she said, "I never imagined I'd be happier on the day I didn't get married." I laughed softly. "You chose yourself. That's always the right choice." The grand venue, same place, different occasion. Strangely enough, we still went to the venue that evening. Not for a wedding. For a charity gala hosted by Arav Enterprises to launch our new medical scholarship for underprivileged girls in rural India. The same ballroom where Rohan once called me a nobody was now filled with media, doctors, educators, and business leaders gathered to honor the work we had done in just 1 year. We didn't need to steal headlines. They found us anyway. I stood near the stage, greeting guests one by one. This time, they knew who I was. Not because of wealth or power, but because of the lives we were changing. I was mid-conversation with a leading oncologist when I noticed them at the door. Rajendra and Rohan Malhotra. Rohan looked thinner, paler, older in a way that wasn't physical. His company had suffered loss after loss. Investors had pulled back. The media had turned. The board had started whispering about replacing him. And now he stood in a room where he was the outsider. I excused myself and walked toward them. Rajendra offered a faint, tired smile. Rohan didn't speak. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," I said. Rajendra nodded. "I came to acknowledge something I should have, long ago." Rohan looked around the room, then at me. "You win," he muttered. "This was never a competition," I said quietly. "But if it was, the prize was dignity, not profit." He flinched. "You still have time," I added, "to become someone your future children won't be ashamed of." He looked at me, eyes full of unspoken regrets, and said nothing. They left before dinner was served. The speech that wasn't about revenge. Later that night, I was called on stage. The applause was generous, but I didn't let it carry me. I wasn't there for praise. I stood behind the podium and let my eyes settle on the crowd. Years ago, I lost everything. The room went quiet. Not because I failed, but because I trusted the wrong people. I was called many things: liar, fraud, criminal. And then I was forgotten, erased. I paused. And that was the greatest gift. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Because in losing everything, I discovered what really matters. I found a quiet life. I raised a daughter. I taught her not how to chase money, but how to walk away from it with her head high. I glanced at Arushi, sitting in the front row. Her eyes shimmered. And then, one day, someone called me a nobody. I smiled, and for the first time I believed them. Not because I lacked value, but because I no longer needed anyone else's validation. Being a nobody meant I was finally free from needing to prove myself. I looked out at the room. CEOs, investors, media moguls, hanging on every word. "But here's the secret," I said. "Nobody is truly a nobody. We are made of stories, sacrifices, and love that no bank balance can measure." I stepped away from the mic, and the room erupted in applause. Not just polite, but sincere. Not loud because I was powerful. Loud because they finally understood. After the applause, as the night wound down, many approached me with handshakes, business cards, proposals. I took none. I already had what I needed. Arushi walked beside me as we exited the ballroom, hand in hand. "Papa," she said. "What now?" I looked up at the stars. "Now." I smiled. "Now we live. Without needing to prove anything. Without needing to win. We just be." She nodded, her smile wide. We walked away, not with an army or an empire, but with peace. That was my revenge. Not wealth, not dominance, but choosing to rise without hate. Choosing to walk through fire and come out whole. Choosing to be a nobody